Welcome to the Meria Heller Show, on the net since 2000 and still going strong. If you feel like you're not getting the real news, if you feel like you're not connected spiritually, you have found your home. Meria covers a wide range of topics as only a snarky New Yorker can. Straight up, no chaser. No censorship, no corporate sponsors, thus true freedom of speech. Your subscription gives you unlimited access as a member of the smartest audience on earth. Relax and enjoy the education. Now here's Meria.
Good morning, world. Meria here, alive and kicking. Welcome to the show, Hell and High Water. Today with my friend, co-host, adopted son, maybe a son from a past life, Chuck Ochelli. If you're not familiar with Chuck's work, get over to ochelli.com. There's a live link right here. And good morning, Chuck.
Oh, good morning, Mom. You know, I guess it's a good morning. It's definitely a morning, and I'm not sure if we're mourning over things that we've lost, or if we're just in mourning, or if we're dealing with the Mercury retrograde hangover of the initiation. I'm at a loss to truly describe what it is, but I certainly wish that your morning was good, and every morning is good for you, no matter which morning we're talking about.
Well, you got to start your day the right way, and I don't mean with the proper cereal. Okay, you got to start your day every day. Just get out of bed and be thankful you're alive, and then make a decision to have a good day. And if you're spiritual, religious, whatever you are, start your day with a good mantra, or a good prayer, whichever works for you. If you start your day on the right note, the rest of the day follows. That old saying, today creates tomorrow, is not just words. I mean, it's the truth. If you have a crappy day today and you're going to wake up tomorrow cursing your alarm clock, guess what? You're going to have the same crappy day.
Most people expect us to probably launch into some news right after you give them a little attitude adjustment at the top, and I love that. I love that that's exactly what you do every show, whether you realize it or not, and I've listened to you a lot over the years. There's always this little adjustment at the beginning, even if it's just, I'm alive and kicking and hello world. Just the attitude you project. And, they probably expect us to go into the madness of the day, maybe talk about, the odd haircut of Boris Johnson and how he wants to go out screaming dude today, or maybe Trump's latest tweets, or the outrages, or the clashes, or the politics, or the latest attempt to obstruct people's abilities to go out there and exercise their rights, or the latest murders being committed by the state. But let's not do that today, Meria.
All right. Well, I'm sure you remember the movie with Robin Williams, Good Morning Vietnam. And when he used to open his radio show on the base, he would say, "Good morning, Vietnam." So, years ago when I started the show, that always stuck out in my head, which is why I always say, good morning, world. Meria here, Meria Heller here, alive and kicking. So that's kind of where I got that little intro from. Because I've lived a long time and I got a lot of stuff in my head. Actually, my next news show is going to start off pretty funny thanks to Monica Sepulveda. But I'm going to leave that for the audience. I think they'll enjoy the intro. So listen, you have to have a sense of humor. If you don't have a good sense of humor, there is absolutely no way that anybody can exist on this planet, especially in the state that it's in. So if you don't have a good sense of humor, if you don't have a real spiritual understanding of what's going on this planet, of course you're going to be knocked off kilter. And, the important thing is to remember that we're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time. And this world may not look like we're having a good time, but that's your individual choice every morning when you wake up.
No, and I absolutely agree with you. I mean, a little inside baseball here. I mean, I announced the date at the beginning of most of my shows, and I do it in a backhanded sort of way. I remind people that's, I give them the date allegedly based on this thing we call a calendar, because marking time in this particular way has not necessarily always been the same. And, it's just a point of reference. But for a point of reference, let's go to the fact that, 20 years you've been you're beginning your 20th, right?
I'm
Is
starting
that
actually right this month, next week actually. I start my 20th year on the net. But I also did,
net?
yeah, I also did a year of radio, terrestrial radio before that.
Right, and look, we've talked about that, here and there, but let me begin by providing a retrospective for people by asking you questions that you're not prepared for, but we might as well. I'm sure you know the answers. So think about this very carefully. How is it that you got started on the terrestrial radio scene to begin with? I mean, did you? Let's go to the beginning of the beginning, right? Because you were an artist, and you were an activist, and you were a mother, and you were a businesswoman on various levels previous to this, right? One wonders.
Well, it's interesting you asked that because that was exactly what I thought you would ask me. And I was thinking about that last night, and I said, I've put out little drips and drabs through the years to my audience, but I never really told them the whole story. And I said, maybe I should tell the whole story just for posterity's sake. So it's interesting that would be the first thing you would ask me.
Well, I also thought to myself, it's one of the things I don't personally know either, because although you have made mentions and given me dribs and drabs privately too, quite honestly, I don't know the whole story, so I want to learn along with the audience exactly what it was that made you into what you are today, 20 years later on the net. But, I mean, let's talk about the beginning of the beginning, because there was obviously something that inspired or incited you to turn from, doing pretty well at some other things and following your artistic. I mean, we've talked about how people should follow their artistic muses, so to speak, because they're not there for no reason. We've talked about all that before, but I mean, how is it that you go from that to deciding, yes, I'm going to speak on the radio? How did that happen?
It's a pretty long and funny story, so I don't want to take up the whole hour, but I will tell the story. But okay. I will preface it with this. I will say this. In all my life, never once did I have a desire or inkling or thought to do radio. Okay, never once. So there I was. It was, I don't know, I was about 48 years old. I had just gotten divorced. I already had my own business. As you know, I do counseling, not just spiritual counseling, business counseling. I mean, I did work in Manhattan for 22 years, so I have a great business sense. And at that time, I had a client who came to me basically just for a counseling session. And 2 weeks later, she called me on the phone. She says, I know you don't know me very well, but I'm going to Hawaii. I got a 5-star suite. The person I was going with can't go. Would you like to go with me? I mean, this was crazy stuff, right, Chuck? So I thought about it, and she was likable enough. So I figured, hey, free trip to Hawaii. Why not go? And when I did go, I started to see the ins and outs of her business. And she asked me if I would work her business. Now, I had a client before her. What I used to do is if I have one businesswoman and one woman client in business, I would literally spend one whole year with that client, working and walking and traveling with them through their business and find out where they were losing money, what they were doing wrong, which employees were stealing from them, because I also used my experience with my intuition along with my business knowledge, and help them get their businesses back on track. So I had just finished up with one other young woman, and she came along. And she was a high roller in Vegas. She used to put on a lot of events for all the high rollers. This was a side of life I had never seen, Chuck. Okay. So I helped her put together her computer network because she was computer ignorant. I helped her put together these golf trips in different exotic places for all these high rollers. And if anybody doesn't know what a high roller is in Las Vegas, these are people that have their own casinos. They have their own floors in casinos, their own private tables, their own private restaurants, and all the casinos you and I would normally travel to and never be allowed into. So these are people that lay, 10 grand on a roulette turn. So I worked with her through her business, and part of her business, because she was advertising. And she had this so-called psychic who was doing a radio show for her that she was paying $10,000 a month, Chuck. Okay? Think about this. 10 grand a month. This is, 20 years ago. Cash. She had paid all her bills in cash. That's the kind of money she carried in her handbag. And we had a business meeting with, a lunch meeting with him one day. And I just sat there. I told both these clients to never introduce me to anyone. No one needed to know who I was. I would just sit in right with them at the table and observe. And listening to this guy, Chuck, he was so boring and he sucked so bad. She's ready to open up her handbag and hand over 10 grand to this guy. And I kick her under the table. She shut her handbag and said, "I forgot my money. I'll have to pay you next time." So when he left the table, I said, "Are you kidding me? You're giving this guy this kind of money to do a radio show just for her ads, just so she could play her ads somewhere." And I said, "This guy sucks. I can guarantee you nobody's listening to this guy." And then I just said off the cuff, Chuck, I could do a better job. So she looked at me and she said, "Well, when you go back to Phoenix, go buy some radio time." I said, "What?" And she says, "Yeah, go buy some radio time, do a show." I said to her, "Listen, I don't want to do radio. I was just saying that. What would I ever talk about?" And she says, "You can talk about a million things. You figure it out." And she gives me a chunk of money. So I come back to Phoenix, one of the few people that always came back from Vegas with a lot of money because I was actually working there. And it's kind of funny. And then I found KFNX, which is a local radio station where you buy airtime. So I go in there and they introduced me to this tall, good-looking young man who's all dressed up in goth. I mean, black from head to toe, the earrings, the whole deal. And his name was Jack Blood. And I sat down with this young man and I told him I wanted to buy 6 months radio time. And he says, "Well, okay." He says, "What do you want to talk about?" I said, "I don't know yet." Okay. So here I am driving down to Phoenix from Scottsdale to do a radio show. And I didn't even want to do it. No idea what I would talk about. So I just called it Meria Heller, commentator on the human species. That was the beginning of the show.
Let me interrupt you real quick.
Sure.
Because you mentioned you met Jack and he was dressed in a goth sort of way. Again, 20 years ago. So we're talking about just previous to 9/11 kind of time period here, right?
Well, we're talking about. I would say it was probably 1998 or 99. Okay. It was before the stolen election of 2000.
Right. Well, that was my next point. Is that it was probably previous to that. So I mean, you're talking about the end of the Clinton administration, right. First of all, and secondly, you met Jack. Now, did you have any? Because I've always wanted to know this. When you met him, did you have any immediate impressions about him, or what did your intuition say?
I loved Jack. I found him quite quirky in those days. He ended up being the producer of my show. And Jack was not where he was to become, all right? This was before Jack was doing the same work I'm doing. Jack was literally running that whole station, and he was a great station manager, and that's what Jack always excelled at, running radio stations.
Well, right. Well, he was a musician before that. And probably during that as well, but the interesting thing is that he did wind up for a time just sort of in the white bread business of running radio stations,
right?
Where you end up having to put on a lot of hats. But I was just curious because I knew also that he hadn't gotten to where he was going to be yet.
No.
So I was just curious, about those impressions. And
right.
The first thing that comes out of your mouth is, "I loved him." So, all right.
Right.
So continue.
So, there I am on the show. I was doing a little bit of everything. Okay. I was talking a little bit about the news, exposing Bill Clinton's mega trips over to China wondering what he was selling us out to with China. You know, when people look at me ripping on Trump, they think this is something new. No, I have exposed all these criminals since I became aware, okay? And after the show, I would sit with Jack for an hour, sometimes 2 hours, talking to him about what I learned. And I hope that that was part of what triggered him to go into things the way he did and become the excellent broadcaster he was. So we both kind of woke up and backed into all this crap at the same time. I would do a little astrology, and then Jack said, why don't you try doing some little mini readings for people on the air? Let's see how it goes. So when I said I was going to do free little small mini reads for people, their board lit up like it had never lit up before. I mean, in one show, think about it, it was a 60-minute radio show. I did 50 readings. And
are these just random callers? Like, you can call in, don't tell me anything,
right,
and I'll do a reading for you?
Right. Just give me a question, and I would throw out a few cards. The cards would give me the answer, and I'd give it to them.
Okay.
So unbeknownst to the station managers, it becomes their number one show. Now, remember, I was paying for this. Okay.
Right.
Everybody on that station has always paid for their show. And it was also aired out of Rhode Island, their sister station. So I started getting a lot of acclaim, a lot of notice. People were sending me gifts in the mail, okay? Jewelry. I mean, men were handcrafting jewelry for me. I mean, it was crazy stuff. But it was very enjoyable. And then I started adding more and more news in between. Jack wanted the owners to put me on drive time because he said she'll blow every other station out of the water. For whatever reason, they refused to do it. So after my 6-month contract I went into Jack's office. I shook his hand. I said, Jack, it's been a pleasure meeting you. I'm out the door. Thanks a lot, because we weren't going to renew the contract. And Jack said to me, you can't leave. And I said, what do you mean I can't leave? He says, you're the only one bringing in any listeners on this station. So I said, Jack, please, I don't want to do radio. This was just a job because I was still traveling around with my business partner working. And I said to him, they'd have to make me an offer I can't refuse. Well, in the history of that station, all of a sudden, they offer me the spot free of charge to keep me there. So I stayed there. I don't remember if it was 6 months or another 12 months, honestly. And then I had a fallout with the 2 Italians that owned the place, and I don't need to tell you as an Italian, the Italian words that I gave them on my way out. Because
I can imagine.
And now that was a Friday. And this is where the story gets funny, and please, my listening audience, don't judge me for this. At the time, I had this 27-year-old rocker with long curly purple hair down to his ass, who had the biggest crush on me in the world, okay? He just wouldn't let go. And I said to him, listen, I got genes older than you, I did everything I could to dissuade this guy. But one night he had invited me to go listen to his band play in a little club in Tempe where there's nothing but young people, okay? Now, my previous client and I used to do talent scouting. That's what we did. So I said to one of my best friends, I said to him, listen, there's no way I'm going to see this kid play. I said, he's just a kid, what the hell, I'm embarrassed. And he said, give the kid a break, I think you should go. And I said, the only way I'm going is if you go with me. So he agrees to go with me, all right? Who knew this club was like enormous, and it's super packed with young people. When he and I walk through the door, this kid is on the stage with his band rocking out. He stops in the middle of the song the minute I walk in and introduces me to the whole damn club. It was so embarrassing, right? I walk in there, and the only way I could be okay with being with so many young kids and not feel like their grandmother was to pretend again that I was talent scouting, because that's what I did with my previous client. We would talent scout around the country for talent and models and whatnot and get them contracts in Manhattan. So I sit down at the table, and when it's quiet enough, I'm sitting with about 6 of his friends. One of them, believe it or not, looked just like you, Chuck. Okay? Now that I think about it. And this kid looks at me and he says to me, I'm so-and-so. He says, what do you do? And I said, well, up until yesterday, I did radio. So I said, what do you do? He says, well, I do websites. I said, well, give me a card because I'm reinventing myself again. I'm going to need a website. So he says to me, so radio. He goes, are you any good? And I just looked at him and gave him the stare. I said, are you kidding me? I said, I'm the best, right? So he tells me that his friend Jordan, who's 29 years old, now remember this was like 1999, was trying to start up internet radio, something that Yahoo tried and failed after investing like $12 million. So he says, if you're any good, I'll tell my friend about you. And this kid, Jordan, was a rocket scientist, one of the smartest young men I've ever met in my life, Chuck. So the next day, which is now Sunday, I think, Saturday or Sunday, this kid calls me up and explains to me he's trying to get a little radio station going with maybe 6 different guests, 6 different hosts, 6 different shows. And he says, are you any good? And I said to him, I can part the sea for you. That's how confident I was in myself.
Right.
Well, he comes to my house. Now, remember, Chuck, there were no computers a lot of computers still didn't even have sound on them in those days, let alone speakers. What this kid had to do to jimmy around with about 12 different peripherals, a regular PC, to make me produce audio was amazing, okay? You couldn't do it on a Mac in those days.
This is in the days where he probably had to pull out entire boards and stick in new stuff.
Connect a sound. We had the soundboard. I mean, everything. It was so confusing.
Right.
But I'll tell you what. I saw that kid rock out on a Friday night. I had my first show on the following Monday. So I go on the air, and he had, other people. It was like a little mini version of Gary Knoll's network, with the hours and times people would be broadcasting. And I just blew people out of the water. So I had told this kid, I said, well, that sounds like fun. I'll try it for a couple of months. That was 20 years ago.
Okay, well, I'm wondering a couple of things. First of all, do you have any recordings of the stuff that you did on terrestrial radio?
I have a box full of cassette tapes. That Jack would give me a cassette tape every week of my radio shows. I don't even know how to even play a cassette tape anymore.
Well, has this stuff ever surfaced on the internet anywhere?
No.
Oh boy.
Not at all.
So there is a treasure trove of Meria previous to internet radio.
Right.
Sitting in a box.
It's in a box sitting in my garage, and I often question, should I even keep these or just toss them? But they're still there. After the first show, he called me and he said, your show's a hit. You had 15 listeners. I said, 15, and you consider that a hit? He said, yes. Nobody even knows internet radio existed. And in those days, they didn't call it a podcast. It was called a webcast.
That's right. The live version of it was a webcast. A podcast is a concept that started to come around just a little bit after that.
Right.
And it was based on the fact that you had an iPod. See, that was the thing.
Right. So, but in those early days, what I did was I was literally just spinning tunes. I was doing like a disc jockey with my feelings and thoughts, opinions, history in between each song. The audience started to really grow because I knew 60s rock probably better than anybody. And a lot of those people that started out with me when I was just basically DJing stayed with me all these years.
Wow.
And then as I was going along with the show, it got close to the election of 2000. And my spiritual guidance, my higher self, the voice in my head, whatever you want to call it, said to me, you have to cover politics and the environment now because Bush will destroy the environment. And as you know, I was and still am a strict environmentalist my whole life. So I actually answered the voice in my head and said, anything but that. No way. Okay? Because I always tell people, Spirit dragged me kicking and screaming into this. So now I had to back into all the conspiracies, all the stuff that I never wanted to know, like most people didn't want to know. Because I knew I had to work as hard as possible to prevent George W. Bush from becoming president.
Well, let's pause that for a second, because I got a question about, what your level of awareness might have been when it comes to, I hate to use the term, but alternative sort of information. The history that was a bit deeper, the deep political realities. Because that information was certainly available before you started doing the radio show. So I was wondering, what was your, did you just have an intuitive kind of like, look, I know that the powers that be like to lie to us and that's it? Or did you have, specific inklings into, say, some of the greater real-life conspiracies that we know about today? Obviously this is post-Iran-Contra, this is post-Clinton scandal, this is post-JFK, and a lot of other things that, you were cognitively aware of, obviously before this,
right?
But you just hadn't gone into a deep dive. What would you say your level of awareness of that kind of stuff was historically?
I would say at that point, 10%. So,
Wow.
I had my teacher Sun Bear in the late 80s who talked about a lot of that. Besides, his spiritual teachings, he talked about a lot of it. And he, of course, recommended Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper, who was murdered in his driveway. So I had read Cooper's work. I had read Sun Bear's work on it. But remember, I was a successful mother, worker. I had my own business. I had a beautiful home. We lived on the beach. I had a great life going. So like everybody else out there, whether your life is great or not, I didn't want to go into this crap. I wanted to pretend like everybody else. Even when I read Cooper's book, I kind of like stored it away as, maybe it's fantasy. Okay. But now when I get direct direction from my higher self that I have to do this, the workload was enormous. When people say, I want to do what you do, I say, well, you got 20 years to study and do what I do? Because that's what it took. So when I look at my show, and I had asked my listeners to tell me what changed in your life or, how the show affected you, I think to myself, the show changed my entire life. My education, my health. I have so much to be thankful for because I learned along with my listeners.
See, that's the thing. I was trying to get to that because when you bring up Bill Cooper, right, he was on a different trajectory, and he had been really introduced into internet radio at about the same time as you too, which is basically because of the technology. But it's interesting to me as to who made it there in the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. Sideline is that Jack Blood also ends up entering into the internet radio arena almost at the same time.
Right.
Now, the funny part is, again, I look at perspective and parallels, right? I was well ahead of you as far as studying some of these things deeply. Mm-hmm. But even though I had always wanted to be on radio, I did not feel inspired to do so. I was still on a different path for a while, but I was studying a lot of the historical stuff, getting myself ready, right? You sort of fell into this and were dragged into it spiritually. I don't think I got moved to that until, I would say at least 10 years after you and trying to consider this, which is fascinating, but it's an odd time. And you and I even talked about Mae Brussel not too long ago.
Right.
You weren't even aware of her, which is interesting to me.
Right.
Because if somebody listens to Mae Brussel, you would almost think Mae Brussel inspired Maria Heller.
Right. So when people told me about her, after I'd done the show for so many years, and I listened to her, it really freaked me out. I was like, okay, is this lady like, was I her in a past life? How did she influence me? I never listened to her, and it freaked me out. It really did. I couldn't
Yeah, she
listen
only
to
survived
her.
into the 80s there,
Right.
which, again is an interesting thing. It's like the late 80s, by the way, is an interesting time period because it seems to me as though this was a pivotal point there toward the end of the 80s for a lot of people. I mean,
Well,
that's
there's
when
a
I got
reason.
into my JFK stuff.
Right.
That's when I really think a lot of things started to change
Right. Well,
in a
there's a
spiritual
reason.
sense.
There's a reason for that. What happened in the late 80s? What happened in 1988 on a spiritual level? You may not know, but if you Google it after the show, which you probably will, you're going to find out, wow, this was big time and I didn't know about it. Okay? In 1988 on a spiritual level, there was what was being called the Harmonic Convergence. In 1988, when that energy hit the planet, all the spiritual people woke up. It was like magic. There were celebrations going on, huge gatherings to welcome in the harmonic convergence. So this is not, this isn't something that's obscure. You can Google it and see. So for me, it was that year that I met Sun Bear. And that changed my entire life. His philosophy, his medicine wheel, changed my life in every direction. The next big change I got was, of course, jumping into radio, which I never expected to do. But I take his teachings as an environmental, spiritual person into every show I do. Years ago when they tried to start up that supposed liberal radio station, the producer called me, and he wasted 2 hours of my time interviewing me because all my listeners wrote them and said, if you're going to do a progressive radio station, you have to carry the Meria Heller show. And the station was going to be called Air America. I don't know if you remember that or not, Chuck.
I sure do.
Well, he called me up. God, right now I don't remember his name. And he's enticing me to go along with this. And then he said, listen, I'd love to have you on board. Get this is supposed to be a progressive radio station. He says, but our stockholders would never stand for it because you're a loose cannon.
Huh.
So I said to him, well, let me ask you this. I says, if it's a progressive radio station, why are you naming it after a drug running operation out of Vietnam?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, he didn't have much of an answer for that. And then he said something very profound. He says, you already have your niche. He says, you're the only person out there giving out the news with spiritual views.
This is true, and it's funny. I mean, that thing folded like a bad suit,
Right.
real quick because there was nothing to it.
Right.
And that's the next question about this. I don't know how we're doing on time because I let you keep track
Well,
of
hold
time
that.
during the shows.
Yeah, hold that question. Let's take a break, and we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Sure.
Okay, welcome back to Hell and High Water with myself and Chuck Ochelli. Chuck's learning a lot about how I got into this racket. I hope you're enjoying this. And for me, it's like a trip down memory lane. I've started remembering things I totally forgot.
Yeah, I got to say this is interesting to me, and I know it's a change of pace if you're used to Hell and High Water, but quite frankly, I think it's good that we put this down for posterity somewhere.
Right, exactly.
And really recognize. I mean, the fact is that if you don't know and you stumbled across this program accidentally, I mean, Meria Heller is a unique, absolutely unique entity there in the world, one way or another. And this is one aspect of her life that I really am happy to explore. And I'm just grateful that you guys are learning along with me exactly where the mouth that roars came from.
Right. Now, let me explain this to my audience. When Jordan was producing my show for me, the young man I met, I would say every 2 or 3 years, I would tell him that, I would call him almost crying and say, Jordan, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't work this hard. I can't work any harder than I'm working. And he would constantly remind me, you say that to me every so often, and then you work harder than you did before. So he encouraged me, but I think by 5 years in, he said I knew more about producing the show and my equipment than him, and he said that I had outgrown him and that I needed to look for someone else to host and do my show. And it was at that point that, I became totally independent. But I still love him till this day, because he was huge in helping me get started. But listen, there have always been days that I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too much. I'm tired of it. I want to have my life. And then it passes. And now, with Trump, how can I possibly stop? Do you know what I mean? Look at what's going on. Environmentally, that's number one to me, is the environment. Because without a healthy environment, our souls have nowhere to live. All the other issues mean nothing. So I continue on. I don't think I've taken one day off from the show since the campaign of 2016.
Well, it's been tough. Quite frankly, look, I'm going to share publicly here a little bit. You and I have had lots of conversations where we feel so exhausted with what's gone on in the past couple of years that we don't necessarily disagree with some of our colleagues who have stopped, who have given up, because
right.
The fact is it's very hard to do.
Exactly. Listen, my daughter, who's like a speed freak, she's like goes 100 miles an hour. She was here the other day when I was recording my new show, and she listened from the other room. And when I was done, she says, "Ma, how the hell do you do that?" She says, "I couldn't do what you do one day a week." And I looked at her and I said, "If I don't do it, who will?"
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that it needs to be done.
Right.
And here's the fascinating part about it. You mentioned that you had been part of the Air America nonsense, or you could have been potentially.
Right. But I was a loose cannon.
Well, yeah, and you know what? It's a funny thing because I've had meetings with people who don't know what to make of me either. Who at some points think I might be on the lib side, who might think I might be on the conservative side. They don't know what to make of me. I have this problem where a lot of people say, and I know that you're a little bit left of me, generally speaking, but it's funny. I can't really put you on the left or the right, although a lot of people try and put you into a category.
Good luck.
And that's changed over time, I think. But obviously there's some liberal aspects to you that really are truthfully liberal, but let's get away from the labels for a second and talk about how that's changed, because, the idea that you could have been on the liberal side of the equation when it came to broadcasting, right? And then you contrast it with, okay, well, maybe you were too much of a loose cannon for the liberals. Today, those who are on the new right alternative and the people that were part of the Patriot movement and all that, they would outright reject you, based on a whole bunch of different reasons.
All right.
You end up in a category of your own, and this is something that, again, you and I share, where people don't exactly know what to make of us, but I'm wondering how that's changed over the years, because I know it's certainly changed for me in a shorter amount of time. I can imagine that there's been an odd trajectory where people have pushed back against you based on an assumed label.
Right.
Which again is ridiculous, considering that, I don't know anybody who does exactly what you do. And I'm somebody who took a long time to pay very close attention to a lot of different broadcasters, to see what was available, to see if I had anything to add to the discourse in general before I even started my show, right?
Right.
And I felt that I did, so I did. But the thing is, you came out of the gate with something unique that has not been duplicated, and yet you've probably been called a lot of different things, and we joked.
I've been called.
Off air
Listen, I've been
some
called.
Of the misconceptions.
Right.
What is it like to be in your own category doing this? And take me through it chronologically, because again, being on the liberal side of the equation is a whole different thing in the year 2001, 2002 than it is in 2019. So, could you give me a sense of that?
Listen, as my listeners know, I don't believe in labels. I don't believe in sexual labels. I don't believe in labeling diseases. I don't believe in labeling our children. And if you want to know where it starts, it was when I was a little girl. And my mother said to me, when they made you, they broke the mold. And she always added, thank God. Okay. Everybody's always tried to pigeonhole me since I was a child, whether it was as a kid with my psychic deliveries to people in the neighborhood who thought I was, the devil. Whether it was in high school arguing and proving my points against the teachers. Whether it was me out on Earth Day, screaming to 25,000 people on the beach about, what we need to do to save this planet. No one's ever been able to pigeonhole me. I have no label. I am Meria, period. That's where it ends. People try to say you're Democrat, this, and no, I'm not a member of any party. I'm not a member of any religion. I see, and what I see is what I tell. And my vision isn't just from this little body, okay? So, when you say, how do people relate to you and your audience and this and that and getting on these other shows or whatever. Listen, Chuck, I've known since I was a little girl, and I had that near-death experience when I was 4. I knew I didn't know where the hell I was, but one thing I knew was this planet was not my home. And I knew my friends and people, I guess is the best way I can describe it, were out there twisting in the wind. And I knew consciously, I said to myself in my little girl head, how do I get home? Where are my people? I have to find them, wake them up, and get them ready to go home. I have not changed that goal all these years. So my show is for my people, and I don't mean I own them, my people, my soul group, and I've never hidden that. I know there are very few people who are as awake as I am, but I can tell you they're all listening to my show. They're the ones supporting my show. They're the ones that I've made not feel alone on this planet. The people that are so enlightened that they can understand my truth. One of the best things, I don't know if you remember Aaron Russo. Do you remember Aaron Russo? He did From Freedom to
the
Fascism.
Death of America and all that.
Right, I met Aaron at some event years ago, and his publicity guy came up to me and he says, you know what, Meria? There's one thing that Aaron continually says about you and your show. And I said, what is it? He says, Meria Heller has integrity. And, that was an important thing my father taught me, integrity. When people say, why are you always right? And, they're sending me congratulations on my 20th year. And my answer is always the same. There's only one truth. It's like people say, how could one psychic on the other side of the country tell me the same thing you do? And my answer is the same. That person is real, and they tap into the same source. There's only one truth. And the consistency and the integrity of my show never changes. People say, what you were saying 20 years ago, you're still saying. I don't flip-flop like a lot of these other people who thought they were going to get rich quick and they were going to succeed at what I do. I can do what you do better. And I watched them come and go in less than a year. Mm-hmm. You got to have discipline. You got to have determination. You have to have good study skills. You got to have a working brain. And it is a lot. But obviously, it's something that even though it didn't register when I first got into it, it is what I came here to do.
Mm. That's the thing, is that there are some people that treat this as if they're writing a character, and they might be extremely creative, but the fact is that after a period of time, no matter who the character is, no matter what piece of literature, TV show, whatever, the greatest creative teams that have ever been assembled can only write for a character so long. And when you go on for a long time, it appears to me as though unless you are representing your true self doing this. Unless there is, you finally are invested personally in this, you certainly can't last. You're going to run out of material. It's just
exactly.
It's
well,
just that simple.
Years ago, I was asked to teach a course on podcasting at one of the community colleges in Scottsdale. And, there were a lot of young people there, and I was telling them, what are you going to talk about on your show? The equipment, I can explain the equipment to you. I can explain the expenses to you. But if you think you're going to do a show every week on the same topic, you're already dead in the water. So for me, the great challenge was, especially in the beginning, was to keep the show interesting. And the only way I know whether it's an author, whether it's, an activist or a doctor that I put on the show, the only way I know my audience will know it's interesting is if I find it interesting.
Right.
Because I equate my audience's intelligence level equal to mine. And one thing, from Greg Palast to, Arun Gandhi, I've interviewed so many people through the years, I've forgotten half of them. The one thing that they've always appreciated is I read their books. I know their work. It's not off a cheat sheet. So people always say, you get interviews with people, they say things on your show they've never said anywhere else. And I said that's because I respect their work enough to read it before I interview them. So it's not like Oprah or whatever, and it still amazes me when somebody subscribes and I send them an email thanking them and welcoming them. They get surprised that they even hear from me. They said, I've made donations to this person, that person. I don't even get a thank you, not even a form letter. Well, I'm not those people. I'm just a regular person like everybody else. I'm in it with them. Why wouldn't I be courteous and have manners? And even though, I do have a mouth like a sailor, but hey, I'm from Brooklyn and I am Italian. So there you have it. I don't believe in political correctness or any of that crap. Okay? We don't have time for that. Okay? The clock is ticking on the human race. And
right.
I want to assure that my soul group makes it intact. I work for them, nobody else. The majority of people, they're never going to get it. And that's their problem. I'm not here for them.
Right. No, and I appreciate that. Believe me, and have had to learn that from you, that attitude. Because I was sitting sometimes thinking that I was doing something really magnificent. Because in my head, it was just this is really revelatory. This is something that nobody's saying, and this should be heard. And I'm covering something in a unique way, and crickets is what I get back, and I go, okay.
Yeah, but remember, the real reason you're doing this, the real person you're doing this for, is you.
Right.
I do
but like
this
I said,
for
I
me.
had to learn that from you, and you seem to come into this right away with that attitude, which is fascinating because you could probably write a short book, too, on the individuals that have come in and offered you things to try and get you. We talked about on this show the Democratic Party at one point wanted you to run for office.
Right. Listen, they wanted me to run for office in New York after I did my Earth Day event because they had never seen anything like it. And I did it with no money.
Right.
And it was huge. It made the papers. 25,000 people in a town of 30,000 showed up. So politics isn't the way to go for me. I've always known that. It's like Spirit told me, never go to a protest. We need you more on the air than we need you in jail. So I listen to my inner guidance. But again, I never tell my audience to do something I'm not willing to do myself. Whether it's health-wise, diet-wise, not having a cell phone, not having TV in my house. I like to live by example, and it's interesting because I've been taking my granddaughter with me to my gym because she's staying with me. And one of the guys that's there said to her yesterday, I overheard him. He said, the best thing that you could possibly do is to continue coming here with your grandmother because she leads by example. She's consistent. She's here every day. So, to me, that's a compliment. But, anything you want to do in this life, if you're not consistent, there's no way you're going to be successful. But make no mistake about it. What I'm doing here is gathering this information, putting it out in the ethers. Who knows how far my voice goes into other galaxies? How many other species on other planets are listening to my recording of the end of the human race as a possibility? You never know where you reverberate to. But for me, I'm building my next house. When I leave this planet, I want to say, you know what? I did everything I knew how to do. I'm here with clean hands. Let me go forward, because I certainly don't want to come back here.
No, and I'm with you there. Now, I want to wrap around two concepts really quickly here, because I was trying to introduce the idea that people have attempted to utilize you because of the strength of your presence, basically. Whether it's the Democratic Party or the people in New York or other offers that have been made to you. But at the same time, you have this show that's going on, and you've had a interesting carousel of co-hosts.
Yes, I have.
Over the years. You brought these people in, you very carefully selected them. I'm not saying this because I'm one of them either. Quite frankly, I'm shocked that I'm here. But
you're the only one that ever had 2 shows a month, so give yourself a gold star.
Well, I need a couple of gold stars for that, as far as I'm concerned, because you're very selective about that. Now, I'm not going to say that I loved every last one of the co-hosts you've had or anything like that. My opinion's irrelevant. Here's the thing, though. I know that you could have had other people that probably would have drawn more attention to the show. You could have had other people. You could have made this offer. And there's other people who've kind of asked me, is there some way that I can get on with Meria? And I tell them, we'll contact her, see what she says.
Right.
Right. Because I have no idea what your process is. You said something about your soul group. Obviously, part of your soul group is your listeners.
And the other part are my guests and co-hosts.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody I meet, everybody I interact with, even my clients, my students, they're all part of my soul group, or I wouldn't give any of them the time of day.
Right. But, I mean, what is is there sort of a process by which you've selected, because you've had, like you said, hundreds of people could have been your co-hosts. There's only a handful of people that have done regular shows with you. And I'm wondering if there's something you could give us sort of like as an insight as to how that happens.
Well, they have to vibe with me. It was like the first time Richard Grove sent me his material. I was blown away by it. And then, I met Richard. We worked together in Chicago, different things, and I eventually asked him if he would co-host a show. Even Jim Fetzer. I work with Jim in public, together, and he was great. And in a lot of ways, we vibed a lot, and then we didn't. And then as a lady, and he handled it as a gentleman, we parted ways. I've never been ugly to anybody except one co-host who just wouldn't stop ragging on Jews. And I said, I'm not allowing that crap on my show. So he went the way of the wind. That was years ago. But I've also had dear co-hosts who have left the planet. And then when I have to look to replace them, that's very difficult. Bob Chapman, he was freaking great. He was probably the best economist I could ever have had on my show. Dave McGowan, forget it. I miss him every day. Dave and I were like of the same mind. And his sense of humor and mine, we just gelled. We did shows just like I do with you, Chuck. We prepared nothing. Okay? And those shows were great. The ones we weren't prepared for, I think, were better than the ones we prepared for.
That is the story of Hell and High Water right there, by the way.
Right.
When we prepared stuff, I don't feel as good about it, but when we just, you call me, and 5 minutes before you press record, we go, well, this is what we're going to do today, okay? Okay.
Right.
It always turns out so
want
much
that,
better.
but see, I want that. I want that like-mindedness, even though we don't agree on everything. God knows Jack and I went at it pretty good sometimes. But Jack and I were great together, because he makes you think, his perspective, his strength. There's so much that goes into it. Recently I got Bev Conover of the Intrepid Report. Now, Bev and I have known each other for 22 friggin' years, okay? I've always, carried her work on my show, etc. But only recently I got her to agree to co-host a show every other month. She's loving it and my audience is loving it. So, for me, it was always difficult to find a woman to put on my show to co-host because there really weren't any of them out there doing what I do or at my level or willing to come on the show. So, I enjoy the hell out of having Bev on the show, and she's the only person I know who's been online longer than me.
Well, and that leads me to a specific, because, and by the way, if you haven't been in Maria's archives and gotten the blood and guts stuff with her and Jack, absolutely amazing. I used to be extremely regular about making sure I caught blood and guts when it came out,
Right.
all the time. But, Monica is actually the one that puzzles me, that you added her to the stable of regulars. I did not expect somebody like Monica to be added. Now, again, I don't know your entire mind, right? But it almost seemed like when you first said you were going to have her on, I'll be frank with you, I thought it was redundant. Why do I need anybody else insightful? I've already got Meria, right?
Right.
So, bring somebody else to the table, Meria. What are you doing? Is what I felt like. Of course, I've been proven wrong about that, but I mean, how did that come about? Because that almost seems like one of the stranger additions.
All right.
You bring me on, I've got a weird voice, and and definitely I'm just as few of you, but we have the shared camaraderie and the like-mindedness that just falls into place for some reason. You got the shows that you've done with Richard Grove, where he's informative and you're informative, and it's like a tennis match. Even the stuff with Fetzer, where you were going with the retrospective about the time period and how times have changed. I mean, all of these things had great flows and great directions that seemed like they were pre-planned, even if they weren't. Dave McGowan, of course, that's a unique chapter there, but honestly, Monica's the one that puzzled me. When you added her, and there wasn't that long ago, I think it was, the last year you added her, right?
Yeah, about that, I think. I don't know, time flies when you're having fun. But, David Icke introduced me to Monica. And when they were putting together that TV station that never worked out of the UK, Monica was one of the hosts. And when Monica contacted me and we started chit-chatting between each other, I really liked her. And I wanted to have a spiritual show. With two different people talking, between Monica and I, we have literally probably 100 years of experience in metaphysics. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important. I think my spiritual shows are the most important shows I do, because that gives people tools, techniques, and hope. So I'm happy to do those shows. Those shows for me, whether it's Monica or Michael Ray Keir, are like a breath of fresh air, because if I could talk about one thing all day long, it would be spirituality.
Yeah, see, the funny thing is, like I said, I questioned it when you first did it, like, that seems odd to me, because I was used to Joseph Anthony, and those are good shows if you listen to them in the archives at Meria.net, but I mean, and it was different because
Joe was an astrologer.
Joe focused on the charts.
Right, right. But Joe was an astrologer, and then Joe moved on to pursue his career in the way he wants. He gave me plenty, a notice that, as of December, he'd stop doing the show, which I was okay with, because I'm happy for my friends when they're living their bliss. And I haven't really seen any astrologer that I would replace him with, because if the astrologer doesn't know what's going on in the world, I'm not interested.
Right, but I'm trying to present a perspective here where, there's the Michael Rakia thing, but that's certainly different than what you're doing with Monica.
Right.
And I don't know if it's it's not like a question and answer thing between the two of you. It's like, it's almost like a chorus, which is interesting,
All right. Well, it is a course. We're teaching people. People need to learn these skills. Some of my listeners say some of it's basic or they've heard it before. But I said, yeah, but there's a lot of people that don't know this stuff.
No, that's true, and you know what? It is never a bad thing to get a little refresher too.
Right. Listen, Chuck, I can't believe we're out of time, but I have to cut this show because I want to send it over to Gary's network for Sunday. But we could pick this up on our next show if you want.
You know what? We'll see where the Spirit guides us, because I think this is extremely important. But even if we stopped right here, I think that you probably never given people this amount of detail.
No, I never have.
The evolution.
I never have, so I'm glad to do it today. But, and bottom line, last thing, are you loving the shows with Monica and me?
Oh, I appreciate them, sure. I absolutely do. And they're different every single time. It's not,
I know. It's like coffee talk.
Yeah, kind of. It's sort of like with you and me. You never quite know what you're going to get.
No, but it's always going to be interesting. Chuck, take good care. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mom.
You're welcome. Chuck Ochelli. Check him out at Ochelli.com. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I will read you guys' notes on my next news show. Thanks for supporting the show.
Thank you for listening and supporting the Meria Show. Tell others what you learned today. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it's shared. Encourage others to subscribe today. www.meria.net. Often imitated, never duplicated. A world of information all in one place. www.meria.net. Always ahead of the curve. Always on your side. Get active or get radioactive. Subscribe today.